When I told my friend, one of my best friends a few months ago, that I'm open to the possibility of aliens, he literally like scoffed and was like, "You are the last person I could imagine believing in aliens," because I've just always been like, "This is so stupid." I always thought of it being like people that are like, "I was probed by aliens," you know what I mean? I was working at my cornfield and I got beamed up and they had these instruments, whatever. That's what I thought. In the whole COVID bill they released, they actually said as a part of this, they demanded that the government needs to release all the information they have on unidentified flying objects. They actually have a different name for it now. I forget what it is. By June. So apparently this month at some point, whatever the government has on aliens or flying objects or whatever it might be is supposed to be released. Jeff, do you believe in aliens? Hey, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we talk about the principles behind the plans. Hey, I'm one of your hosts. My name is Dave.
And my name is Jeff, and we're glad you're with us today.
Glad you're with us today. Okay, quick recap, because we've been doing this for a while, and it went way longer than we expected. But our team we watch from soccer, Chelsea, actually won the entire thing, the Champions League, which is a really big deal.
It was a great day on Saturday. This past Saturday, we were recording this just a few days after they won the Champions League, which is like the Super Bowl of Europe. They were sort of underdogs. We won 1-0. It was just a great day.
It was an awesome day. Yeah, good to be alive. Good time to be a Chelsea fan.
So we've been teasing a lot of things throughout these last few podcasts. One, we've been talking about our Chelsea fandom, Premier League soccer. And then second, we have been saying for quite some time that we are going to do a summer episode on aliens.
And we're actually here, because the last few times you've been like, aliens. And I'm like, well, we're not there yet. But we had a conversation and we were like, let's just do this. Let's just actually get the aliens episode on
So for
tape.
those of you who are tempted to turn that off, like, I don't want to hear about that, we are actually going to talk about something broader than that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about how...
Let me just tell the title.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
So the title for today is Aliens, Science, and the Future of Christianity.
Okay, good. Awesome.
Aliens, Science, and the Future of Christianity. So it's more than just about aliens. It's actually really about how future discoveries may influence our faith and Christianity's place in the world moving forward. But aliens is a good place to start.
Sure.
And again, I know that it sounds ridiculous to some people. In fact, I'll tell you what, even as recently as 6 months ago, I thought that the whole notion was unbelievably stupid.
Yeah.
But I am having my mind opened more than it used to be. Let me just start off with this question.
Okay, wait. So we have to say, as a little bit of a disclaimer, Dave is a sci-fi aficionado. You like all the movies that are Star Wars and...
True.
Okay, and I am not.
Although that has absolutely nothing to do with whether I believe in the reality.
I know, but I think it's probably a good backdrop. Like, I have always somewhat mocked them, right? So you'll probably see the angles we're coming at from the very beginning. But go ahead.
You know what, Dad?
Tell
Galileo was mocked in his time too. Okay, so here's my first question. I just want to start off by asking, just for those listeners, Jeff, do you believe in aliens?
I do not. Now, based upon the understanding of the facts that I see today, I don't. But you might share something with me in this podcast that could change my mind. I'm open-minded, but currently I do not.
Okay, so let me just start with this. Again, if you're like, what the heck, aliens, just stick with me for a couple of minutes, because it's less ridiculous than you would think it is. At least where we're going to take this. When I told my friend. One of my best friends a few months ago, that I'm open to the possibility of aliens, he literally like scoffed and was like, "You are the last person I could imagine believing in aliens," because I've just always been like, this is so stupid. I always thought of it being like people that are like, I was probed by aliens, you know what I mean? I was working at my cornfield and I got beamed up and they had these instruments, whatever. That's what I thought. And what changed my mind, not that aliens were real, but what lent a degree of credibility was I was listening to a podcast, and they brought on someone who was a pilot for, I believe it was the Air Force, or maybe it was the Navy. I think it's actually the Navy. And he describes this encounter with some kind of a flying object, a flying spacecraft thing that was obviously piloted. It's not just like a bird or something that he got really close to. And if you're wanting to actually look this up, his name is Commander David Fravor. And if you want to go to YouTube, you can Google David Fravor, 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 and Tic Tac. Because that's what he describes the ship. So basically, let me just give some context. This happened in 2004 off the coast of San Diego, and it's footage that has been released from the military fighter jet that he was flying in. That it's like an F-21 Raptor or something like that. I'm probably saying it wrong. But it's stuff that actually the military has verified. This is real footage that they don't know what to do with, and actually there's been more like it that's come out since. So essentially, the event in question is, and I won't go into too much detail, but just to give an idea of what opened my mind. They're flying, and doing this scouting run across like right off of the coast of San Diego, and they get this call from one of the people who's like in the radio tower telling them where to go. They say, go check this thing out. So 2 planes fly, and they see this weird shaped thing that's hovering over the ocean, making these ripply waves. And so David Fravor and his partner, they fly down real close and try to get like right up on top of it. And then all of a sudden the thing is just like hovering like a helicopter. It like shoots off, and they're like recording it, and they switch through several different thermal camera views. And then all of a sudden it like zips off like way faster than any fighter pilot or any plane known to man. Okay. Whether or not it's man-made or whatever, it's like they have no technology like this that they're aware of. This is 2004. There's been a bunch more stuff like this since then, and they have other military footage that's come out. This has become such a big deal that in the whole COVID bill they released, they actually said as a part of this, they demanded that the government needs to release all the information they have on unidentified flying objects. They actually have a different name for it now. I forget what it is. By June. So apparently this month at some point,
this is timely.
Yeah, whatever the government has on aliens or flying objects or whatever it might be is supposed to be released. Okay. So we have no idea what it's going to be. What lent it credibility to me is this guy is not a crazy person. He has no other connections to aliens. He's not like a theoretical physicist who has watched too much Star Wars. He's just a normal, like, gruff military commander that described this event that nobody has any idea what it is. Mm-hmm. So that got me thinking.
Well, that on top of the Mars rover, and will they discover something that shows that there's life on Mars?
Sure.
There's a lot of speculation around that too, and I think this kind of thing isn't all that new. I grew up there were UFOs in the 70s, and there was speculation about Area 51 back in the day. And
sure.
Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, the whole thing. How can you explain this? Look at this video footage. So that's not actually all that new. Nothing has come out to this date which would say this is proven to exist.
Okay, but what is new is up until recently, there was no credible footage from a government source.
Okay.
So now that there's actually military footage out there, it's like it's been sanctioned. Like, oh, this because it's like home footage, or somebody took a picture in their backyard,
right?
And it's like, okay. I mean, I'll be honest. I still don't believe in Bigfoot. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a Loch Ness monster. I don't know, but like the only reason I would even give that any credibility is because it's just one of the deepest lakes, and who knows what's in aquatic bodies of water. But
you have thought deeply about these things.
Oh, I have. I really have. Well, because so once I got on this idea, like aliens, you know what I mean? And then Sarah and I watched a documentary. My wife Sarah and I watched a documentary later that it was one of the best ones I've seen, where it had this guy and several other military people on there who were describing this. There's a lot of hokey, weird stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff.
So what makes this an issue, though, for a podcast like this is there is a little bit of a fear in the Christian community that if they did discover life on Mars, that if they do determine that these are aliens, that will make everything about the Bible, everything that we understand about the worldview that is the Christian worldview, it no longer would hold any weight, because obviously humanity is no longer what we think it is, and there's way more going on in the universe than we think that there is, and therefore
right.
all of Christianity sort of goes away with new scientific discoveries.
Yes.
And that's the kind of the core of the question.
Yeah.
Which is, what if they do discover, what if in June it comes out in the COVID-19 bill that there actually is something going on? What will that mean for our faith?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. And you know what? There's a lot more I want to dive into, because that's the meat of this. But first, can I just play around with the aliens thing a little more? Because this made me laugh out loud, but I guess it's something that we would have to contend with. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just imagine a hypothetical scenario before we get into new scientific discoveries and how that impacts the future of Christianity as we know it. Okay. If they did discover sentient alien life forms that aren't in the Bible, this it was cracking me up, but they're actual real questions. So they're like, there's 4 options that we have as far as how the cross and Jesus relates to aliens. The first one is that aliens are not fallen. They haven't had sin, and thus have no need for redemption. This already is a funny place to start. So aliens are not fallen.
This is clearly our weirdest episode
This is
already.
such a weird episode. It's funny because it's like, I guess we would have to contend with this.
Yes.
So what are aliens? Okay, if they're like people, number one, maybe aliens aren't fallen, thus have no need for redemption. 2, aliens are fallen. Okay, they have sinned. And they have their own relationship with God that's different from ours.
Okay.
Number 3, the third option, aliens are fallen, they've sinned, but they are included in Christ's redemptive work on earth.
Okay.
So when Jesus died, he died once and for all for aliens too.
Yeah. I don't think that I would agree with that. Keep going. What's 4?
Or number 4, aliens are fallen, but Christ's incarnation and redemptive work are repeated in their own world.
Yeah.
So Jesus came as an alien and died on
That sounds a little cultic to me.
died on the alien cross for the sins of other creatures.
Yeah.
Which, you know
like
what?
there are parallel universes and
Yeah.
redemption happens in every one of them. And okay. Yeah. I guess in the realm of possibility, we could say that may be true. We don't know everything about God and the eons of the ages that have existed up until now. So
Sure.
There are theoretical possibilities. The idea of Jesus' death on the cross as a human being paying for the sin of aliens, I think that's probably a little...
It's a stretch.
Yeah, that's out of bounds.
Okay, for sure. Okay, so we're going to get into the meat of this for just a second. But before we totally leave this, what I do think is a good question before getting into the rest of science is just... like, let's say that there were aliens that were actually discovered. Again, I know that for some of you, this is just such a wild possibility. Like, there's absolutely no chance, right? But if there, just hypothetically, if there were, is there anything in Scripture where aliens would disprove the existence of God, or that the Bible is inaccurate, or how would... What do you think about
I mean, okay, so there are heavenly creatures, right? There are seraphim and cherubim that are very odd, right? They're covered with eyes, and they have wings, and they cover their face. And okay, so those creatures that are heavenly creatures are described for us in heaven. There are, like as Ezekiel described it, as the wheel within the wheel, and there was, one side with the face of an ox, and the other face of a lion, the other face of an eagle, the other face of a man. So what was Ezekiel seeing? Was it an unidentified flying object? Was it an angelic creature? Obviously, God's created some things in the heavenly realms that we don't understand. Even the imagery of the book of Revelation, we assume that everything that the writer there, John, writes about is symbolic. But we don't know that some of what he saw wasn't actual. Mm-hmm. And so I have to think we leave it in the realm of possibility that there are creatures that God has made that we might be introduced to in heaven that we know nothing about here on this earth. Yeah. So yeah, that's possible.
You know what I think is really interesting to me is how there's only a couple of sentences written on the fall of angels. So we know that before there ever was the earth that we know it, or the universe was created, there was the existence of an entire race of angels that God had created. And then we had the fall of Lucifer, and where we have 1/3 of the angels that decided to turn from God and fell and became demons. There's nothing about that. That would be, I'm sure there's a whole epic story out there about what actually happened, but we have just a simplified, condensed version. So part of me just thinks like, obviously the Bible is very centered on God's relationship with humanity. And again, I'm not saying there are aliens, but it does make me wonder.
Well, and I think maybe part of the reason why we don't have information on that is because clearly it's easy to become fascinated with it. In fact, I think it's in the book of Colossians, Paul warns about becoming consumed with these kind of supernatural beings and the fantastic things that could go along with them, because very easily it could become idolatry or even just a distraction to the mission of what Jesus gave us to do on earth.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, I think there is a whole bunch about the realm of the heavens that involves principalities and powers and order and creatures and battles between angels and demons, and we know nothing about it really, except for a few little glimpses that we have in the scriptures.
I was really captivated by that book that Frank Peretti wrote, This Present Darkness, I think is what it's called,
Right.
when I was a young teenager. It's a work of fiction that describes what may be happening in the spiritual realm
When we pray.
But so this idea has always kind of fascinated me.
Yeah, and if you're interested in good fiction, This Present Darkness, Piercing the Darkness, there's a great one called The Oath that Frank Peretti wrote that is really good, I guess you'd call it sci-fi Christian fiction, which is really kind of interesting.
It's almost like Stephen King if he wrote fiction for Christians.
Yeah, because it has some spiritual application to meaning, what you read in these books.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So moving on from aliens for a second, I think this is just a really great topic for us to discuss, because for a lot of people, there might almost be this innate hesitancy or even a little bit of a fear of, you know what, like, I want to fully dive into my faith, but I probably should avoid science, or maybe even for some people, I'm not sure if I really could be a person of faith because I'm a man or a woman of science. And those things seem to contradict one another. And there's a famous atheist named Richard Dawkins. He wrote a book called The God Delusion. And one of the things that he proposed in there that I really think has taken root pretty deeply in pop culture and in just secular society is this idea of the reason for God being God of the gaps. Have you heard this before? You probably have.
I probably have, but describe it a little bit further.
Okay, so God of the gaps. So the idea of this is that the reason why humanity invented, in his reasoning, this God delusion that we've now, in his opinion, held on to for far too long, because again, he's an atheist, is that there were things in creation and in nature that we couldn't explain. We didn't understand the cosmos. We didn't understand why the weather patterns would change. And so there were big gaps in human understanding and knowledge. But that as we've grown and evolved and gotten some scientific discoveries, there are less and less gaps. And his thing is that we've gotten to the point now, or there's not really many, or if any, gaps for God to fill. Therefore, now it's just a delusional thing that people are using to gain control or manipulation or power over a population. Almost like that religion is the opium of the masses or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so first of all, that to me is a rather, I want to use the word ridiculous, so a rather bold statement to say that there are no gaps left because, oh my goodness, there's so much we don't understand. Mm-hmm. There's no explanation for some things. Like, for instance, we were talking before this podcast about Michael B. He wrote the book Darwin's Black Box, in which he describes the fact that there is in every cell something called irreducible complexity, because every cell has a DNA code in it, which is ordered, and it is like it's like the Encyclopedia Britannica full volumes put in exact order, and that for that to be just a naturalistic accident is truly impossible.
Can I elaborate on the irreducible complexity thing just to give some context? Basically, his idea is that there are some things that it's not like it could have evolved from a simple machine into a complex machine. It's like there's something that's the equivalent of a computer in a cell, where it's like if you break this into pieces, it just doesn't work. There's no way it could have been one thing that combined into two things that combined into this extra big thing. It's just like, even at a cellular level,
it's complex. Yeah, the thought was originally with evolution that maybe there was a simple cell that evolved into a little bit more complex cell that developed over millions of years into a more but every cell in the universe has complexity that cannot be explained away, other than that it was put there by somebody who ordered it that way on purpose. Mm-hmm. And so how would you get explanation for that gap, along with probably we understand a lot of things, but I mean, even COVID-19, the fact that the whole world could be held at bay and put on lockdown due to an unresolvable issue with the virus in 2020 and 2021 is a sign that our medical science hasn't advanced that far. Now, we got a vaccine pretty quick. That's great. But even still, we're all reminded last year of the fact that there are some things for which there's no simple solutions. And so I just don't think that it's solved the gap. But neither do I think that God is just a wild guess to explain how everything worked out. I actually think that science and faith are not at odds with each other at all. Mm-hmm. They're actually complementary.
Yeah, if you're a curious listener and you'd like to know more, because we're not going to do it all justice, a really easy, good book to read. It's a little dated now, but most of the science in there is actually still pretty current, is Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel, where he kind of examines some of the foundations of what we would call naturalism, mm-hmm. and why science itself doesn't necessarily contradict Christianity, but why this idea that everything has a natural cause does. And he actually goes into detail about how there are so many things that even the most brilliant scientists of our day who are coming up with string theory and this idea of there being multiple universes and all this, how even their best theories still don't even really come close to describing how we could have a universe that occurred by purely naturalistic means. And so it's mm-hmm. a pretty easy read in some ways. It's not written for scientists. It's written for an average person. I think Lee Strobel is a journalist, actually, who interviews scientists. So Case for a Creator is a really good resource. But yeah, so I guess we're sort of discussing this. Do you see...
So let me take you to a moment that happened for me when I was in ninth grade that I think is like the crux of this particular conversation. So as a ninth grader, I was sitting in my physical science class, and we were learning for the first time about the details of evolution. And I remember thinking to myself as I was hearing the teacher teach, if the things that he's saying are true, then what I've been taught in church all my life is wrong. And I remember making up my mind at some point in time there of saying this: if it is true, I won't have a faith that doesn't stand up to sound logic. I'm willing to leave my Christianity if it isn't actually established on some kind of solid fact. And so I was listening with great curiosity. And then we got to the page in the science book where they showed the missing link. You've seen the small monkey that becomes the monkey that sort of stands halfway up, then the Neanderthal man, and then human beings, and how the progression. I remember raising my hand and asking my science teacher, is this actually true? I said, did it happen like that? You have fossil evidence and proof? And he said, no, this is what we imagine happened. Actually, all of these, various versions of the missing link were based upon faulty evidence. They thought this pig's tooth was this particular one. And so there's actually no fossil evidence of a transition between apes and man. And what that did for me after hearing that, I was like, well, this is just all made up. I said that out loud to the teacher. This is just all made up then. He said, well, it's not really made up. It's research, and it's what scientists project to happen. But it wasn't really based on anything solid. So that turned me around, and I went back and I said, I feel I have more legitimate proof of what I've seen written in the scriptures than what I saw in the science textbook, because it was sort of fabricated based upon naturalism's guess of how it all worked out. So the more I studied about it, the more my faith became stronger, to the point today where I'm not intimidated by scientific discovery at all, because I think that these two things kind of fit together and go together.
That's interesting.
So another thing is, most people, the idea that science and Christianity are opposed to each other is also a misunderstanding of history, because science was birthed out of Christian worldview. The early scientists that we talk about, Isaac Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, they were all Christians. And they believed that God created things in a specific order, so that by studying the way the world was designed, you could actually discover things about your creator. That by discovering creation, you could learn about the creator. And that was the impetus behind the modern scientific movement. It wasn't until hundreds of years later that naturalism kind of grew up to explain away the idea of a creator. But I still to this day think that the Christian worldview is the underpinnings of what scientific discovery really is all made of.
What's really interesting is that a lot of those scientific discoveries that are made by Christians were actually rejected by the church at the time.
Okay,
Some of them were burned at the stake for those things because they thought them heresies to what they understood Scripture to mean. But that was probably because of a misalignment and a misunderstanding of
the
what
church
the
was
Bible
off on a
actually
whole
says.
lot of things back then.
Yeah, they were.
And so just because the organized church disagreed with Copernicus's discovery that the earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around, doesn't mean that Copernicus didn't start with the premise that God is not the sun. Okay, God is the creator of the sun. That's a big distinction. That God created the sun and the earth to have a pattern that you could study. That's a Christian concept, right? It is a concept of a creator God, not a God that inhabits the trees and that mystical powers just sort of move and exist and there's no explanation for them. No, there was this hard reality that God had put the world together on purpose, with a purpose, and it could be
order.
And in order, and it could be studied. That comes from a Christian worldview.
And that it was meant to be studied, actually. I mean, that is definitely... most of the modern scientific advancements that were made that are formative to today were actually made by Christians, for sure.
Yeah, and even like the birth of medical science and the hospital movements.
Sure.
Those are Christian initiatives. Like the idea that somehow science and medical practice are sort of at odds with faith. This is just a complete misrepresentation of history. And it's an ignorance of the worldview of Christianity and how its basis on truth and facts as separate from God creating them is something that I think is a very important distinction. So I in no way am afraid of any future discoveries, even if this UFO turns out to be something that is, I would be completely shocked if it was. But honestly,
you have little faith.
but I that wouldn't bother me if somehow they found water on Mars. But just think about this too. Part of the reason why we believe that human beings are unique in God's eyes is because of the way that the earth has been uniquely designed for life. The way that the earth's axis is tilted so that we don't freeze to death or burn up. The way that the earth rotates, the makeup of the air to be precisely so that we can breathe it, the need for our bodies to process water and the abundance of water that we have on our planet. I mean, there's just so many different things that make life possible here on Earth, and these things are fine-tuned.
Yeah, it's actually called the laws of fine-tuning.
Yeah.
And most of those things, and there's actually, I think there's hundreds or thousands of them, that if they were a fraction different, the gravity that Earth has actually allows for life. Like there's the orbit, the exact distance from the sun. There's a lot of these little things that even if you talk about looking for, they call them Goldilocks planets that are just right for life, there seem to be almost none in the universe.
Yeah.
I mean, like, scientists who are very much looking for this, that are atheists, are like, maybe we have as many as 36. 36 in the universe. It's pretty crazy. The way, like the curve of our solar system, it's an S curve. We need to be in a specific part of the bend. There's all these different things that are little small laws that have allowed for life. Here's a crazy thought exercise for you, because I think that stuff, the cosmic balance of that has allowed for life, shows that it can't be a fluke to me. But if we found out evolution was true, and I know that would mess with someone, they find a missing link, what would that do to you?
Well, there are some parts of evolution that are true. Something called microevolution is true, where within a species of moths, some moths adapt to their environment in order to survive. So microevolution is a proven fact. So when people say evolution is a fact, it's true. Evolution is a fact. Microevolution is. What we have no fossil evidence of at all anywhere is one species changing into another. Let me just say this clearly. There is no fossil evidence ever discovered of one species transitioning into another.
Well, not that's proven. There are things that could suggest it.
Okay, but wouldn't you like, if it's truly the way it happened, for at least to have one leap discovered? If you could just say, this is how this worked. Like, never ever is there a fossil evidence. And in fact, some things would just, you look at certain creatures and you think, how would that have evolved?
Yeah. So can I just throw some wrench into this?
So I know I'm talking to people who are, maybe you have a great stake in believing in the theory of evolution. I just want to say, if you do believe in evolution and theism, let's say you believe God guided the process of evolution and somehow there are just fossil gaps, I think you can be a Christian and believe in evolution. I don't think you have to stop believing in this particular theory necessarily in order to follow Jesus or to go to heaven. For me personally, I just have to say there are some significant scientific gaps in the theory of evolution that really bother macroevolution.
For sure.
Me. Yeah.
So I just want to do this. They say it's best to come up against the strongest portion of somebody's argument rather than the weakest if you really want to contend with it. The best thing we have for evolution is there's a bird-like thing. They call it Archaeopteryx. That seems to be some cross between a bird and a dinosaur. Maybe it was a bird, maybe it was a dinosaur. That is a real thing. It's not. We have no idea what that thing is, nor is it necessarily a causal link that dinosaurs had feathers or that birds evolved from dinosaurs or dinosaurs, not necessarily that, but that is the strongest thing that could be any sort of missing link that we have at all. However, what I will say to substantiate what you just said, if macroevolution is a concept that should just generally go like across the board, it started from one organism that all life evolved from. There are so many things that are missing that should be there if that was truly the case of macroevolution.
And now the explanation for that is that things rapidly evolved. That's why they didn't get captured. So it was like, at first it takes billions of years for it to happen. It happened slowly. And then it was sort of like there was a leap that went from the tadpole to the crawling lizard, on the ground, that went to the squirrel jumping around the trees. Okay, but still there's no evidence for that. So that's part of the problem that exists. But then, okay, I love this example. One of my favorite examples is this question: how did the bombardier beetle evolve? In the butt of a bombardier beetle, there are two chemicals that exist in two different compartments. And in order to ward off its enemy, it fires out of its rear end. And as it fires, it mixes the two chemicals together that causes an explosion out of its backside. But it doesn't explode in them. It explodes after it leaves them because there is an inhibitor that's put in there. Like, how did that happen? What evolutionary process put those explosive chemicals right next to each other with an inhibitor in the middle so that it could ward off its enemies at just the right fart moment? I mean, come on. That is just crazy how could that have happened?
Yeah.
And there are so many examples that are like that. Like, how would this creature describe to me the steps it would take to get there without a guided, intelligent force? Not to mention that on every cell of that bombardier beetle, there's an encyclopedia worth of information that then makes the thing function appropriately.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's just so complex that it screams there had to be a designer. Now, that doesn't mean, if you believe in a designer, it doesn't mean you have to believe in the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that it makes the God of the Bible a very distinct possibility. Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing in what we understand about the way the world is constructed that is anti-Bible.
So I love how Andy Stanley said, even if evolution is proven true, it doesn't actually mess with our theology really, because we just go, okay, so that's how God did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
That's how God did it. Because even the way Genesis is written, when we're talking about in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's a lot of disagreement among Christians who don't believe in evolution as to how God actually did that. Was it a day-age theory where each one of those 7 days was actually a representation of an age as it is figurative and it's poetic, or was it a literal 7 days and everything was created? Or was there a gap? That's what some people think is why the carbon dating fossil record looks the way it does, is because that between a certain amount of, maybe between day 5 and 6 when humans were put on the earth, there was this big gap theory. So there's lots of different
and the reality is the first couple of chapters of Genesis isn't written like a science textbook. It's written more like a play. It's written to describe in grand terms sort of a poetic version of what the beginnings were. I think there are some factual things in there, like each one was created after their own kind.
Sure.
But it really wasn't meant to be a full scientific description of the creation of the world. It was meant to give sort of the grand terms of the fact that there is a God, that he's the creator, that he designed things. And so yeah, there may be a lot of explanations that fill in the science of it.
Yeah,
But
and what I was going to say is I think like a lot of Christians who have been around for a while view evolution. And first of all, I don't believe in evolution. I actually think that the science sort of is against it in general. I think that you kind of have to be a naturalist to really believe in evolution on a macro scale as being the origin of all life. But I think a lot of Christians who've been around for a while tend to think of evolution and Charles Darwin as being the enemy of Christianity that took the need for God out of the way the world was made. But evolution, even in and of itself, could still fit into the context of Scripture without taking away power from God. What I think is the craziest, most convincing proof, and Lee Strobel details this, is the way that the Big Bang actually proves the existence of a creator, because we know that there was a Big Bang. We know that there was a point where the universe, which is now rapidly expanding, if you track it back to its beginnings, was a single finite pinpoint of this extremely dense material that exploded and expanded out all from a singular point that is the universe, right? And it's still expanding out of that initial point of origin. How on earth could that possibly have been caused by something natural? In fact, the laws that we have of science and of the universe wouldn't have applied or existed before the universe came into being.
Yeah.
Like gravity or physics or all of that. Scientists actually can prove none of that actually made sense. So the best possible thing that people can think of is maybe the universe is always expanding and contracting, and there's possibly universes that spawn other universes, but none of it, even if it's theoretically possible, none of it has been proven. And even if it was, there still has to be a point of origin.
Right.
It's impossible for it to be truly infinite. And maybe this is too scientific.
That's called the law of first cause.
Exactly.
There has to be something that caused it all. But to think that explosion then produced irreducible complexity on every cell.
Yeah.
And there's
intelligent life out of a random explosion.
There's also another law called the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the laws of science, which say without outside influence, things don't get better, they get worse.
They deteriorate.
They run down unless someone acts on it from an outside force, and that may be a really crude way.
Things trend towards disorder rather than order. That's what it is.
There you go.
I couldn't think of the
and so evolution goes against that law of the universe, that because evolution is getting more order, and the second law of thermodynamics said without some outside force, everything goes towards disorder.
Yeah, isn't that entropy? Isn't that what that is?
Which is what and the idea that all of these evolutionary changes happen through mutation, which typically makes a species unable to reproduce.
Sure.
Again, a lot of just scientific facts that stand in the way. All this to say, if you feel a passion towards science, be the best scientist you can be.
Absolutely.
Study it out. Don't turn your brain off. Keep it focused on the facts. But don't just make assumptions because the popular culture says that faith and science are opposed to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's a stupid myth.
It is.
And it actually hinders a lot of people from pursuing their faith because they feel like they have to check their intellect at the door. Hopefully you, through this conversation you hear Dave and I having today, you are saying, I can be robust intellectually. I can even consider the possibility of the fact that there might be alien discoveries out there.
Sure.
And it is not going to shake my Christian faith. Because if it is true, if Christianity is true, nothing we will discover will be contrary to what we understand.
Absolutely.
If Christianity is true, even things that are outside of our ability to process, like where does this fit in, still doesn't necessarily shake our faith because there are just some things we don't know. Like you said, the fall of the angels and all the things that went on there and what's going on in the heavens that God has created and what he's potentially able to do. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's good to be curious. So the fact that you want to know all the stuff about aliens, while it's not fascinating to me necessarily, I think it's good to be curious. I think it's how you learn.
Yeah. So I guess like as we start to kind of wrap this thing up, I think you were describing that well. But the reason for this episode is I think that there is, for some people, a sense of nervousness or fear, like, man, if evolution is proven true, if aliens do exist, I'm going to have to rethink my faith entirely. But I do think we just need to take a step back and take a breather and realize that none of this actually has to contradict what we believe anyway. It's not that our faith is so fluid that it can be anything, that it
Right.
can morph to
No.
whatever culture shapes to, but it's that God created the world and the order, and he's a God of order, and science just supports that. So I guess, yeah, like, just to echo what you were saying, I don't think we need to be afraid of scientific discoveries, and I think we actually should even lean into it.
Sure.
In fact, I think one thing that everybody could do from listening to this is maybe even be more open and listen to scientific discoveries and facts, because as people of faith, sometimes we do sort of carry the stereotype of being ignorant of anything that's factual.
Yeah.
You know, of like, oh, they just have their head in their clouds and they ignore science. And
They think of conspiracy theories, and a lot of that is proven to be true by the way people react to things, even like during the pandemic. But I will just add this. If you do become a scientist, or you are one, and you are pursuing your faith, and you are leaving room for the fact that maybe some of the things that the rest of the world believes to be true just simply because that's what they want to believe, not necessarily because there's fossil evidence or scientific reason behind it. If you do stand for your faith in the scientific community, you will be pressured.
Yeah.
Even in the university communities, just like the cancel culture wants to eliminate the biblical worldview from a lot of conversations, especially in the world of science. If you say, I believe in an intelligent designer, or I believe that God created things, or I believe in the God of the Bible, there are a lot of people that will shame you and laugh at you and sneer at you. And so it's not without a price. If you're going to have your faith and be a scientist at the same time, there is a price to be paid for that. But I would say be courageous. Don't allow peer pressure to cause you to believe something that doesn't have a good factual basis to it, just because everyone else in the world believes it to be true. Make sure that you have a rigorous faith and the courage to believe something that truly has evidence behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, you know, I just think we're coming up on an era whenever there's a need and a calling for Christians to be a little more intellectually engaged than there has been a need for in the past. Not to be able to debate or refute people that are attacking our faith.
Yeah. We talked about that a couple episodes ago, where please don't become Mr. Argument,
Right.
who wants to yell at everybody because they believe in a different thing than you. Be patient and kind and tolerant and open-minded, but at the same time, do the rigorous work and be intellectually strong in what you believe, and look at the facts and think it through. You know.
Yeah, that's become a need more and more as our society has gone away from being a Christian culture and towards being a post-Christian culture, because the general belief, like that one guy that I was telling you about, Carl, you actually suggested that book that we were both reading, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. He calls it the social imaginary, or this belief system that
you said that real fast. Say it again in case people are interested.
Yeah, it's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. Amazing book, where this professor from Grove City does a phenomenal job of sort of describing the historical basis for the beliefs of secular culture and where they came from. People like Sigmund Freud and Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, Percy B. Shelley and the Romantics. Anyway, all of those ideas that have been around for 100 or a couple of hundred years, how they've sort of combined to be the unconscious belief system that secular culture holds. Because what I was going to say is, because that is so far off from the Christian ethic, I guess you could say, from the Christian belief system, it's more and more important that we study and understand the Bible as well as science, because you're not going to get what you should believe by just being a person. Like, you're not just going to get it from discussions or from what you hear. You're really going to have to study and discuss, or else you're going to look like that person that's just like, see no evil, hear no evil.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It was just like, I'm just listening to the Bible and that's good enough for me. Like, it is good enough, but you should probably know a little bit more about why you believe what you believe. And there's a ton of resources out there on those things.
Yeah, there is. That's good. So hopefully, maybe some of you are listening to this podcast. Dave has been a fountain of good books to read, and there's a lot of ones that we've mentioned in this podcast that would be good follow-ups. for you to be able to study for yourself. And if you know of a resource that we haven't talked about and you want to refer it to us, we'd be happy to receive that, because we know we're not the be-all and end-all of all of this. So how do we end this episode on aliens, Dave? You have one last curious fact for us that maybe people are unaware of, or what we should be looking for next in this big discussion?
That's a great question. I don't know if I do. I guess, I feel like even though this is sort of a weird topic out of left field, I just think the era that we're in is one that requires us to be knowledgeable and aware and in the loop of things, and that to not have a lot of fear over what that'll do to our faith. But yeah, I mean, I could list other resources. I don't need to do that. No other weird facts. Just be listening for what the government's going to tell us about the existence of aliens this June, coming not to a theater, but coming to a news station near you very shortly. So yeah. Hey, well, as always, we just want to thank you for joining us for this episode. We would love it if you would share this with your friends on social media, if you would subscribe and leave us some good reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just to get the word out. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.